There's a 17th century drill day going on at Fort Rodman. And the cool part is the fort is open. So you can go in there until 2 o'clock. Weather's good until 2, so you guys should come down. I'm going to walk around, show off some of the stuff. Some old muskets and rifles. Bring the kids down, be pretty fun.
That is 17th century.
But that's how we tie in the maritime.
Work like this
to us.
It was fun. I actually did the work and got back self-back.
That would be funny.
And documented.
Honestly, that would be funny. It'd be funny to tie a brownie on it. A big wet plate camera. Someone that posted on what that next selfie stick, and it was like a long pitchfork, and I had an old one.
Looks like he survived the gunshot, huh?
Oh yeah. Well, there's a story about that.
Yeah? You want to tell
Well,
it?
this one's a little pronounced. When an armorer made a piece of armor, he wanted to prove that it would stop a musket ball, so he'd set it up, fire a musket ball at it,
Oh, okay.
and it would make a dent, hopefully not go through, and that was called the proof
A
mark.
reputable armorer would do that.
Called a proof mark.
Disreputable armorer would grab a peening hammer, hit it, and then say, yes, it's proofed. But you'll see if you go to a museum and even see the originals, except for the extremely fancy ones that may have been chased and engraved, etc., all of a plain pikeman's armor like that would have that dent in it as a proof that it would stop a musket ball at the time, which was a nice idea, but it became very cumbersome to fight muskets with these. You're not moving very well. They are somewhat restrictive. By the middle part of the 17th century, which is more what I represent, about the only piece of armor you had left was the gorget, which was originally to protect the neck, but just became something that officers would wear at that point in time. So, and sometimes with a cuirass or a breastplate, but most of the time just by itself as an indication of rank. So it was a time when things were evolving very quickly.
What's going on today? What are you guys doing?
We're just down here to do a drill, to talk with people and help instruct about the 17th century. I mean, if you look at the gentleman here in the red, for example, I mean, he's representing very much that Pilgrim period when, here, especially in Massachusetts, we were first established. And then we kind of moved through time a little bit from these two gents who were representing that very early period to us about 20 years later.
How far do you travel?
The three of us here. More representative of about 1630, 1640, and if you notice, our attire is a little bit different, more professional soldiers than just the citizen soldier. And then you move into the gentleman at the next tent fly down here from the Dartmouth Militia, who are representing the late part of the century, King Philip's War, 1675 and on. And you'll see that there's an evolution in clothing. They're wearing much longer weapons. They've gotten away from the matchlock weapons and gotten into flintlocks and doglocks, which were much more efficient in a lot of ways, also much more expensive to manufacture. But as we got to that time period where there were tensions, very strong tensions between the Native American tribes here and the settlers, that the Native Americans were able to acquire state-of-the-art weapons that were being supplied by the Dutch and coming down from the Dutch and the French out of Canada. They would trade for those, and they actually had better weapons than the white settlers did. So that when the tensions began to really rise by 1675, orders were sent out to the various militias that the members should acquire doglocks, more modern weapons, so they'd be more in line with the natives in case fighting broke out, which as we know it did. And even though the 1675 period was a very short war, it was very violent. The weapon that Doug's carrying here is a doglock, and as you can see, if you compare and contrast, and I'll hold mine up as well underneath that
It's right
one.
on your main page. It's like
Here's the earliest stuff. I mean, even just rapidly looking at it, you've got a lot more. You've got a lot more technology going on here, a lot more machining in pieces. This one's very simple, Doug, if you just want to turn it this way. They both work under the same principle. You've got a steel barrel into which goes black powder. When you open the pan on this one, or when you bring this one to half cock, you'll see there's a pan. You'll see there's a hole that goes through to the inside of the barrel. Same principle. Priming powder would go in here, and that would have to be ignited in order to make the gun fire. In the case of the matchlock, I'm just going to reach back here, you'd have a piece of cord that would be soaked in some type of sulfur solution. The cord would go into the jaws of this serpentine, so you've got a burning match. You'd be blowing on that to keep an ember hot. We're not going to actually fire this. This is just to demonstrate, but you'd be carrying this burning match. You'd be carrying your powder in these wooden bottles, so it's a little bit dangerous. You try this to make sure it's going to land in the right spot. When you're ready to fire, you would open this, bring the match to the powder, and boom, it would go off. When you get more technological, now you've got a series of springs. You've got a spring on this piece, which is called a frisson, which is hardened steel. You strike hardened steel with a piece of flint, it makes a spark. So once primed and loaded, there'd be powder in here. That would be closed to keep the powder in the pan. It's at half cock right now. Actually, that is not. Yeah. Okay. So there's your safety position. This is called a dog. That's why these are called a dog lock. All right. So that's your safety. Gun won't go off because the dog is holding the back of what's called the cock or the hammer. When you bring it to full cock and you're ready to fire, there's a large spring inside. There's actually two springs inside that control this mechanism. When you do pull the trigger, hopefully there'll be sparks, which there weren't, so this needs to be cleaned up a little bit. But the flint goes through, strikes the sparks, opens the pan on its way by. The sparks hit the powder that's in the pan, goes through the hole into the chamber, boom. So there's pluses and minuses to each one. I can't fire this on a rainy day because my match is probably going to go out. But then again, you can't fire this too well on a rainy day because when you're priming, water gets into the powder, it's not very efficient. Guess what? Not a lot of battles in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century were fought on big rainy days. And if they started and it began to rain, it ended up going to hand. Now, take a look at the other end of these guns. Look at these butts and the way they're shaped. Part of this, the big flares in these, the sharp edges, guess what? These are weapons too. So if you're gutting in close, too close to take the time to fire, now you're hand to hand. And now you're using the club end of these to try to wound your enemy. You could even turn them around and use them full on as a club. And now you've got some velocity behind this thing. It wasn't pretty. Right. So at this point in time, we all know that weapons carried bayonets. The bayonets at the time, and I don't have one here that fits this, would have been a plug bayonet. Would have had a wooden end on it, and a big bayonet blade that just would have stuck into the end of the weapon. Now you've got a spiked weapon. You can thrust it somewhere. You can do damage to them that way. We wear swords so that if you've gotten in close and this isn't the best way to fight, you turn to the sword. So that as you develop more and more professionally trained soldiers, you're able to work with the various tools of the trade. And those are blade, those are firearms. By our period, pikes were beginning to go away, so you weren't going at each other with big, long, pointy sticks. You were fighting much more efficiently. So in the same time period of the 1640s, you would have both of these types of weapons. You would have the older matchlocks out there, and you'd have the more modern dog locks at the same time. By the end of the century, by the 1670s, as I said earlier, you were into dog locks almost exclusively. Those evolved into more refined flintlocks, so that by the time you got into the early part of the 18th century, those had evolved, and they stayed. until
we've been doing our
probably about the 1840s when they finally developed the percussion cap, which was the weapon that was used through the American Civil War, and then not long after that those went away and were replaced by guns as we understand them today with a metal cartridge, etc., and that happened by the 1870s. There were some during the war, but they were expensive to manufacture, etc. It was easy to stay with muzzle loaders, so that by the time you got into the Old West period, everything was a cartridge weapon.
These fired lead balls? Is that what these?
Lead ball.
Yeah.
I don't have them with me because we don't carry them.
So kind of poisoned you
Just would have
later.
been a soft lead ball. And a soft lead ball, you don't have a lot of velocity out of these. These are 62 caliber. Most military, full military weapons would have been 75 caliber or 80. So that's a 3/4 inch piece of lead, weighs about an ounce. These are just under an ounce or about 3/4 of an ounce of lead. It's relatively soft, so that when it hits you, if it does pierce and go into you, as soon as it hits a bone, it's going to break. Not the bone, but the lead, and it will scatter into your body. So if you take a shot anywhere in your torso, you're probably going to die eventually. Either you're going to bleed out right on the spot, or poisoning is going to take you out. If you hit in the arm and your arm is shattered, you're probably going to lose the arm, lose the leg, etc. And it's really just that simple. If you survived as a veteran and you didn't get a Purple Heart, you got a stump. It really is what it comes down to. Not pretty. Same thing with sword wounds. If it's a clean sword wound, that's great. If it's a messy sword wound, not so good. Blunt trauma, if you're hit in the head with one of these things, excuse me, you're going to suffer a lot of damage. This is the typical military sword of the time. It's called a mortuary hilt sword. These were manufactured, quite honestly, in mass production. Even in places like the Tower of London, this is a common soldier's sword. You can see it's nothing fancy. Yes, it's got some pretty cut work on it, but it's just sheet steel. It's fire blued just to try to keep some of the rust off of it. It's fairly hefty. This guards the hand, certainly from other swords. It also allows this to be a punching weapon, like a set of brass knuckles. Same thing with the pommel if you get in close and you can strike somebody in the head. But I'll point out on the weapon you have these grooves on the blade itself. And these are called fullers. They were later called blood gutters. Even if you look at something like a World War II bayonet, there's one deep furrow in that. And part of the reason for that is two reasons. One, it helps lighten the blade for efficiency. But the second thing it does is once you've pierced someone with this blade, especially if you've gone in deep, it allows the blood to gush out. And it also makes it so there's not suction, so you can actually draw the blade out of whoever you've stabbed with that blade. Not pretty, but that's the technology. And that's where that comes from. So you'd have to be skilled, as I said, with using this as a primary weapon, using a firearm as a primary weapon, and using yourself, still today, using your body, your hands, etc. as a weapon. Because a lot of the fighting came in very, very close when everything was said and done. And it was that way for centuries.
How about that? What's this here?
This is a priming flask. This holds gunpowder to prime the matchlock that we just saw. So this is secured. It's wooden. It's banded with wood. You've got this stopper on the top, which is held with a spring, but that's how your priming powder would be put into the pan of the weapon. And primers like this would be used for artillery. They'd be used for the muskets. Anything that had to fire and had some type of pan or some type of priming touch hole on it, that's what would be used for it. The other bag that's attached in here would hold your lead balls for firing, and any of the other pouches are just for personal items, etc. Tools to work on the gun. Anything else you may have carried with you into the field. You'd also, somebody had one here. You can see a leather sack over here that's called a snap sack, and that was basically your backpack. So snap sack became knapsack over time, and that's where the terminology comes from.
Take a nap on it?
No. I think it was called a snapsack because you'd just be able to snap it closed and off you'd go. So, yeah, so and actually the NAP I think was KNAP, not
Oh, was it?
NAP. So
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
I'll give you one of our cards. Check that out.
Oh, sure.
Now, when the,
I'll put your link on the,
English
we're
came
doing
here
live
from
right
Europe,
now.
They did bring armor.
I'll put your link on there for later in the archives.
And helmets.
Who are you with?
New
Those
Bedford guy?
didn't-
It's a local
these
magazine.
items didn't
Oh, yeah,
end
I've
up
seen
being
your,
particularly useful in the
I've
new
seen your
world.
stuff.
They weren't really. They weren't
That's
really
us,
suitable
Crew of the
for
Raven.
what
We
the
normally
French
do
actually had to
maritime,
but they were
but
European.
we
They
also
brought what they knew,
we're also soldiers and have been for a very long time. So soldiers coming ashore would have to defend a landing party, etc. So you'd always carry soldiers on board a ship as well.
Yeah.
It's a period piece.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And respect. So there was a lot of it was just for show, if you will.
Well, in the early days too, when the colonists came here in 1620, you remember from history that the French claimed most of all of North America from Hudson's Bay down to Florida. The Spanish claimed it from Florida to the Hudson Bay. The Dutch claimed it all in the center, and the English were taking what they could. So the only thing is that we were, as English colonists, we were worried about not so much the natives that were here, because as the captain said, the weaponry, that pikes and the armor and everything was not suitable for fighting among trees and forests, but it was to fend off if a Spanish warship came into the harbor, or a French or a Dutch warship came in. They would offload people that look like us. They would have their muskets, but they would also have pikes, and they would have swords and bucklers, which is a shield. So they would offload troops to attack us with the European weapons, and then we would have to counter them with the European weapons. That's why the pike stayed in service for a long time. Not so much, again, to be involved with the Native Americans, which there really wasn't that much of a problem in the 1620s and 30s. It was to worry about the Spanish, the French, and the Dutch, because they all claimed the territory, and they weren't above coming to take it. A French colony in the Carolinas was wiped out by the Spanish. Everybody, men, women, and children, just completely wiped out, because the Spanish said they were encroaching upon their territory. So it was a violent age, as all ages are in many ways. So we had to learn how to fight the European way. But as the captain said, gradually that stopped. So that's why you still see the pike. You never know, a Spanish warship or a French or Dutch warship could come right up to Narragansett Bay here, and we're ready. Oh, we got.
That's right. We're ready.
We're ready. And the weapons that we had were matchlocks. I know that there's also some doglocks over there, but the weapons that we have are the matchlocks, and we call them a matchlock because obviously we use a match. And
All right, we got the education, so
More people that make the stuff there than here.
there's not a great signal inside the fort, so I've been kind of avoiding the fort.
They've got castles to play in. They've got towns to play in over there.
So the fort's open today until 2 o'clock, so you got a little bit of time if you want to come down here. It's Clark's Cove. Over that way, pier, the Fort Museum, and you have the fort open. So I'll try to go in, but it's a good chance it's going to cut out because there's only one bar in there. So, but you can go in there right now. Not a lot of opportunities, so you might want to come down. I'll try to get in there. Show you. So here's the main doors. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, we got a chance to go up to that lighthouse, got to walk around. Looks like I'm